A black teenager walks into a luxury store, his honor roll badge still clipped to his hoodie. 5 minutes later, he's on the floor, hands behind his head, accused of stealing the same watch he just paid for. The receipt's in his pocket. The cashier's denying she ever served him. Security won't listen. And as sirens close in, the boy whispers one sentence that changes everything.
Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel and tell us where are you watching from. Watch till the end, then rate this story out of 10. Share in the comments below. Your feedback help us bring you even better stories every single day.
The morning air over Whitebridge University crackled with early autumn chill. The ivy crawling the stone buildings already turning amber and red. Students filtered through the tree-lined quad, heads down, earbuds in, oblivious to the quiet storm about to walk among them. Inside the faculty hall, just past the stained glass arch bearing the university's Latin motto, a man stood straightening his tie. Dr. Elijah Grant, 34, black, history professor, clean-cut, sharp-suited, with a voice like calm water, and eyes that missed nothing. He looked like he belonged in a GQ feature on top 10 most brilliant men you've never heard of. But standing outside the dean's office, his shoulders carried something heavier than a briefcase. This wasn't just a first day. This was a test he'd already taken 100 times in rooms colder than this. Rooms that claimed to be neutral but watched him like a mistake waiting to happen. "The dean will see you now," said the secretary with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. Elijah stepped into a paneled office that reeked of old wood, old money, and older expectations. Dean Rutherford stood to greet him. Handshake firm, gaze scanning. "Dr. Grant, welcome to Whitebridge. We are excited to have someone of your caliber joining our faculty." "Thank you, Dean. It's an honor," Elijah said, meeting the dean's gaze evenly. He had practiced this tone, confident but not arrogant, warm but not too familiar. Anything more and he risked setting off the alarms he knew lived in rooms like this. As they walked down the wide hallway, portraits of past presidents loomed from the walls, every one of them white, every one of them staring down like gatekeepers. "You'll find our students here are motivated," the dean said, careful with his words. "I've found students everywhere are motivated. When someone believes they're capable," Elijah replied, his voice soft but firm. The dean gave a polite chuckle, then pushed open the heavy door to the faculty lounge. The room was quiet, polished, too clean. Coffee steamed from white porcelain cups. Mahogany bookshelves lined the back wall. A dozen professors looked up, mostly older, mostly white, mostly men. Conversations paused, heads turned, assessments began. "Elijah, this is the monthly faculty mixer," the dean announced to the room. "Everyone, meet Dr. Elijah Grant. He'll be teaching African American history and civil rights theory in the humanities department." A beat of silence, then a few claps. Slow, polite, obligatory. "Pleasure to meet you all," Elijah said, offering a modest nod. He moved to pour himself coffee, pretending not to notice how no one stepped aside to make space. A blonde woman in a tailored navy dress glanced at him, then returned to her conversation about research grants. 15 minutes in, Elijah had mapped the room. The science and math faculty dominated the center, laughing easily, dropping terms like quant models and computational hierarchies. The humanities professors hung by the food table, invisible unless someone needed them to quote Baldwin or explain campus activism to donors. "Elijah, over here," a woman called softly. Dr. Janine Holcomb, African American Studies, one of 3 black faculty members on campus. She offered a smile as he approached. "Word is you turned down Yale for this job," she said quietly. "Wasn't about the name," Elijah said. "It was about the fight." She raised an eyebrow. "Then you came to the right place." From across the room, a voice sliced through the hum. "So, Dr. Grant," said a man in a charcoal blazer with a scotch in hand, "can you explain how marching and slogans solve economic disparity?" It was delivered with a smile, but everyone heard the condescension. Dr. Martin Chandler, chair of economics, Ivy League swagger, tenure for decades, known for once calling DEI a nice PR stunt. Elijah turned slowly. "They don't," he said, "but neither does a spreadsheet that ignores who's missing from the data." A few chuckles, a few stiff backs. "Well said," someone murmured. Then she spoke. "Maybe we should test that interdisciplinary potential," said the woman in the navy dress. Dr. Felicity Rhodes, head of mathematics. Her voice was light, almost teasing. but her eyes were locked on Elijah's. Tell me, Dr. Grant, would you recognize a nonlinear dynamical system if it walked into your lecture hall? Laughter bubbled around her. Elijah's coffee hovered midair. His eyes didn't blink. I might, he said, depending on how loudly it disrupts the class. Laughter shifted now. Uneasy. Splintered. Dr. Rhodes raised her glass. Touch. But Elijah felt it then. Beneath the laughter, the smirks, the casual wine-sipping jabs, something colder. He was being positioned, measured, dared, not because they doubted his degree, because they doubted that someone who looked like him could teach anything worth knowing. The mixer ended, but the tension lingered. As Elijah walked the long path to the faculty housing lot, the wind sharp against his jawline, he turned the moment over in his mind. That wasn't just a joke. That was a warning, a challenge. He'd seen it before, in boardrooms, in classrooms, in doctoral defense committees. Some people didn't just dislike sharing power, they refused to believe he had any to share. He paused by the university's stone arch, running his hand over the carved motto, Veritatis Lux, the light of truth. He whispered to himself, let's see how much truth they're really ready for. The next morning, a formal invite appeared in his inbox. Dr. Felicity Rhodes cordially invites you to participate in a live interdisciplinary demo at the upcoming faculty symposium. Topic: Mathematical intelligence across academic borders. Underneath, one sentence stood out like a threat in cursive. Let's see how your theories hold up to real numbers. The email arrived just before dawn. Faculty Symposium, Interdisciplinary Demonstration Lecture on the Overlap of Logic, Proof and Perspective, featuring Dr. Felicity Rhodes, Chair Mathematics. Special guest, Dr. Elijah Grant, Assistant Professor History. Time, 11 a.m. Olin Auditorium. The official tone couldn't mask its subtext. It wasn't an invitation. It was an ambush in a silk envelope. Elijah stared at the screen, one hand cupping his coffee, the other unmoving on the trackpad. He read it again. Then again. There were no details on what she expected from him. No agreed format. No prep call. Just his name, publicly attached to a stage, and a title, delivered with the precision of someone who knew how to put another person on the defensive while appearing perfectly collegial. He didn't respond. Not immediately. Let her wait. Olin Auditorium was packed, not just with faculty. Students had slipped in too. Word had traveled faster than syllabi. A hotshot math professor was inviting a black history scholar into her space, on her turf, to demonstrate interdisciplinary thinking. Everyone had a theory. Some thought it was progressive. Others smirked, expecting entertainment. But the ones who'd seen this dynamic before, especially the few faculty of color on campus, knew exactly what was happening. They called it an old game with new branding. Elijah walked in 10 minutes early, not to prepare, but to disarm. He moved through the crowd like he was part of it, hands in his pockets, nodding to those who made eye contact. No notes, no laptop, just presence. His presence was the statement. Felicity Rhodes stood at the podium already, her blonde hair clipped high, sharp red blazer catching the overhead lights like armor. The large digital board behind her blinked through a rotating series of slides, mostly formulae, clean fonts, cool blue. She spoke with the ease of someone who knew exactly what rooms like this had always done for her. Mathematics is the only universal language, she declared, her voice crisp, her rhythm confident. Its truths don't shift with culture. They aren't shaped by emotion or narrative. They simply are. And in times like these, when subjectivity is too often mistaken for insight, we need objective rigor more than ever.
Elijah said nothing. Not yet.
Rhodes clicked forward to a new slide. A partial differential equation filled the screen, stretching wide with nested symbols and Greek variables. The room stilled for a beat. Some students squinted, trying to follow. A few science faculty nodded with appreciation. This, she said, gesturing to the equation, models heat distribution across varying surfaces. But it also models truth, in a way, how clarity diffuses over time, how noise can distort signal. Of course, I don't expect all disciplines to work with this kind of complexity. The pause that followed wasn't long, just long enough for the implication to land. Not all disciplines, not all people. Rhodes turned with a gracious smile. Dr. Grant, perhaps you'd like to offer your perspective. Elijah rose slowly, the eyes of nearly 200 people tracking his every step toward the stage. He stood beside her but slightly behind, as if refusing the positioning she'd tried to establish. My perspective? He asked, voice smooth but edged with steel. Only if we're honest about what this demonstration actually is. A few heads tilted. I wasn't told what today's topic would be, he continued. No planning call, no context, just my name on a slide, and an expectation that I'd perform. Nervous laughter bubbled in the back rows. Rhodes smiled thinly. I assumed spontaneity would highlight our differences in methodology. Historians, after all, tend to favor narrative over precision. Elijah turned to the massive equation behind him. He studied it casually, as if reading a poem. Then, without raising his voice, he spoke. That's the two-dimensional heat equation on a non-uniform plate. But you've got a subtle divergence error in the bottom left boundary condition. Your boundary function should vary with both x and time t. Otherwise, the system doesn't stabilize in quadrant 4. It explodes. Silence. Even Rhodes blinked. Once. A few seconds ticked by before murmurs rippled through the crowd. That's very observant, she said carefully. Elijah nodded. It's also been true for about 3 slides now. The air in the auditorium shifted. He hadn't humiliated her. He hadn't raised his voice. But he had done something far more dangerous. He'd contradicted her. Calmly. Publicly. And with more precision than anyone expected from a so-called soft science scholar. Rhodes reached for the clicker again, but her hand faltered. Elijah stepped back from the podium. The assumption wasn't just that I couldn't solve the equation. It was that I wouldn't even recognize it. The audience sat in waited stillness. I'll let you continue, he said with a nod, walking back to his seat. For a moment Rhodes didn't move. Then she forced a smile and launched into a new slide about data structures. But the damage had been done. The power had shifted, and everyone in the room felt it. Afterward, in the hallway outside the auditorium, students clustered in excited groups. Faculty murmured, some impressed, some irritated. Elijah didn't linger. But as he stepped into the cool September air, a voice called out behind him. Professor Grant. He turned. A tall, wiry student approached, nervous energy crackling off his frame. The boy had a spiral notebook clutched like a lifeline. Jordan Bell, he said quickly. I'm in your civil rights theory class, and also, Dr. Rhodes' calculus too. Elijah studied him. Brown skin, deep eyes, voice quiet like someone who'd been told to hush too often. I didn't mean to bother you, Jordan said, but I think I need help. Elijah raised an eyebrow. With history? No, Jordan said, looking down. With math. And with staying in school. Jordan shifted his notebook, revealing a disciplinary letter from the university. His GPA had dropped below minimum retention. One more failed exam, and he was gone. Worse still, at the top of the letter, signed in neat cursive, was the name, Dr. Felicity Rhodes. Jordan Bell sat hunched in the corner chair of Elijah's office, gripping his notebook with knuckles white from tension. Outside, the autumn wind rattled the old window panes, but inside the air was heavier, quiet, watchful. Elijah leaned back in his chair, legs crossed, thumb pressed gently against his temple. He didn't speak right away. He let the silence stretch, not to intimidate Jordan, but to give him space to breathe, to decide if he was ready to be honest. Jordan finally looked up, voice barely above a whisper. I thought college would be the hard part, getting in, but now that I'm here, it feels like they've been waiting for me to fall. Elijah didn't smile, didn't nod, didn't offer false comfort. He'd heard this before. In his first semester as a black undergrad at Stanford, in his 3rd month at MIT, in whispered conversations outside the bursar's office, in bathrooms, in bus stops, always the same truth. Acceptance was never the same as belonging. Tell me what's going on, Elijah said. Jordan opened his notebook. The pages were a battlefield. Scribbles, crossed out equations, notes written in 2 different pen colors, one hurried and hopeful, the other defeated. At the top of the most recent page, a red-inked comment from Dr. Rhodes stared back. Fundamental misunderstandings. Again, you need to ask yourself if this major is truly the right fit. Jordan spoke without looking up. That's from my last quiz. I studied every night that week. Elijah read the words again. The phrasing wasn't pedagogical. It was surgical, designed to cut. Did she say this to you, he asked. She says it a lot. Not just to me, mostly to people who look like me. She says we should reevaluate our ambitions before dragging the curve. Elijah's jaw tightened. He kept his tone measured. Have you asked for extra help? I went to office hours twice, Jordan said. First time she told me to come back after reviewing the textbook. Second time she asked if I was lost. Like, if I was in the wrong room. Elijah leaned forward. And tutoring? Study groups? I signed up for peer tutoring. Got dropped when the program got overbooked. They said STEM majors were prioritized. You not a STEM major? Jordan's eyes narrowed. I'm education. I want to teach high school history. But they require 2 calculus courses because of the certification framework. So here I am, failing something that has nothing to do with my future because some state policy thinks it'll make me a better teacher. Elijah nodded slowly. And your scholarship? Academic. GPA minimum's a 3.0, I'm at a 2.4. If I fail the next midterm, he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. Elijah looked back at the red ink, at the arrogance embedded in its casual cruelty. Do you want to keep trying? I do, Jordan said quickly. His voice cracked. I just don't know how. Elijah took a breath, then grabbed a piece of blank paper from his drawer. Let's start with something simple. Not from your book, from mine. He drew a straight line across the page, labeled the endpoints with years.
What do you see?
Jordan frowned. A timeline?
Exactly.
Brown v. Board to the Fair Housing Act. Civil rights legislation. Now, Elijah flipped the paper and drew an axis X and Y. If I told you this curve here models public sentiment over time, and this spike represents Selma, and this drop is post-King assassination backlash, could you track that curve the same way you track a historical one? Jordan nodded, eyes narrowing with interest. Mathematics is just language, Elijah said. It's storytelling, just with fewer vowels. They worked for an hour, no equations, no calculators, just patterns, shapes, logic embedded in civil rights timelines, protests, media reactions, until something clicked in Jordan's posture. He sat taller, his shoulders uncoiled. Wait, he said, pointing to one of Elijah's graphs. This is just a shifted sine wave. Elijah smiled. You remember sine waves? Jordan laughed nervously. Barely. But, yeah, then maybe we're not starting from scratch. By the end of the session, Jordan wasn't healed. But he wasn't hopeless either. And that was enough to begin. Elijah kept their meetings quiet. He didn't advertise them. He didn't ask for praise. He understood how quickly a black professor helping a struggling black student in another department could be framed as overstepping or worse, favoritism. But Jordan was only the first. A week later, a girl named Samantha, also in both his and Rhodes' classes, knocked on his door. Then came Aiden. Then Reggie. Students too embarrassed to speak in class, too afraid to approach Rhodes, too tired of hearing that their struggles were their fault. Elijah didn't call it tutoring. He called it unlearning. Because that's what it was, unlearning the belief that brilliance only came in one form, that knowledge only had one language, that success only looked like whiteboard scribbles and lecture hall dominance. And in each of those students, Elijah saw a younger version of himself. Brilliant, misunderstood, taught to survive, but never taught to belong. It didn't take long for the whispers to start. Dr. Grant was helping math students. In private. Some said he was undermining the math department. Others whispered about academic interference. One even joked at the faculty lounge. Next thing you know, he'll be grading our problem set. Elijah ignored it. Until the email came. Subject: Faculty conduct clarification request. From Assistant Provost Sheila Wexler. To Dr. Elijah Grant. CC Dean Rutherford. Dr. Felicity Rhodes. The message was brief, polite, laced with warning. We have received concerns from multiple faculty members regarding unauthorized cross-departmental academic support being offered to STEM students, potentially causing confusion around instructional boundaries. Please schedule a time to meet and discuss your ongoing engagements with students outside the history curriculum. He read it 3 times. There was no name attached to the complaint, but he didn't need one. That night, he returned to his apartment, sat on the couch, and stared into the dark. He wasn't shocked. He was just tired. Tired of the way systems protected themselves. Tired of how support became suspicion. Tired of how quickly help from someone who looked like him was treated as a threat instead of a gift. But what hit harder than the email was the conversation he remembered from earlier that day. Jordan had stopped by after class, excited. I solved the last practice set. Got 80% right on my own. First time ever. That's great, Elijah said, meaning it. But then Jordan frowned. Dr. Rhodes asked me why I was suddenly trying so hard all of a sudden. I told her I'd been getting help. She didn't ask who. She just looked at me and said, "Well, let's hope it's the right kind of help." Then she raised her eyebrow. That was it. No accusation, no curse word, no insult. Just the kind of micro-slash that cut deeper than any overt attack. Elijah felt it. Not just as a teacher, as a man, as a black man who'd spent his whole life being asked to prove what he already knew. The system wasn't broken. It was built like this. The next morning, Elijah stepped onto campus and noticed something taped to his office door. A folded sheet of paper. He opened it. 4 words scrawled in red ink. "Stay in your lane." Rain pelted the windows like fists that afternoon, streaking the glass with lines that blurred the view outside. Dr. Elijah Grant stood before his students, mid-lecture, chalk in hand. On the blackboard behind him was a quote from Fannie Lou Hamer, underlined in yellow. "I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired." He was teaching about the radical coalition politics of 1964, the way marginalized voices gathered in impossible numbers and made themselves heard in a nation determined not to listen. The classroom was unusually still. Not bored still, but tuned in still. Even the students in the back row were watching him, eyes forward, laptops forgotten. Then, without warning, the door swung open. In stepped Dr. Felicity Rhodes. She didn't knock. She didn't hesitate. Her heels clicked sharply against the tile floor, her red coat still wet from the storm outside. In her right hand, she held a flash drive. Behind her trailed a student worker from the tech lab, awkwardly rolling in a projector cart. The class turned, stunned. Elijah froze, not in fear, but in calculation. "Excuse the interruption," Rhodes said, loud enough to be heard over the rainfall. "Dr. Grant, I hope you don't mind. I thought I'd borrow a minute of your time for an educational demonstration." There was no apology in her voice, no deference, only performance. She moved quickly to the front of the room, as if she belonged there. Elijah stepped aside slightly, not out of submission, but so he could see her more clearly. His students watched, confused. "I've been hearing," she said, plugging in the flash drive, "about some very creative cross-departmental engagement happening lately." The screen flickered. Then the equation appeared, bright white on a black background. Dense, complex, intentionally intimidating. It stretched edge to edge, filled with gradient symbols and layered integrals. "I thought, since you've been helping some of my students," she continued, looking straight at Elijah, "you might enjoy sharing your approach to this. A bit of interdisciplinary inspiration." Not a word from the class, just breath held and waiting. Elijah's eyes scanned the equation. He recognized it instantly. A 4th-order partial differential equation, dealing with anisotropic heat flow in irregular geometries. The kind of problem that didn't show up in undergrad textbooks. The kind of problem you pulled when you wanted someone to fail. He said nothing, just turned back to the students. Rhodes pressed on, her tone bright like theater lights. "This equation models nonlinear diffusion over time. My grad students struggle with it. But perhaps Dr. Grant, with his recent enthusiasm for mathematics, would like to demonstrate a method of solving it." Elijah looked at her, then at the projector, then back at his students. He didn't smile. He didn't flinch, but a pulse beat in his jaw. He stepped forward, picked up the chalk, and walked toward the board. The classroom leaned in. Then he stopped, right in front of the board, chalk hovering over the surface. He paused, turned around, and set the chalk back down. The students blinked. "Dr. Rhodes," he said, voice low but clear, "you walked into my classroom without invitation, interrupted a lecture, and projected an equation not for the sake of education, but for spectacle." Rhodes opened her mouth, but Elijah raised his hand, not to silence, but to continue. "I recognize the problem. I also recognize the game." He took a step closer, not aggressive, but grounded. "This wasn't about the math," he said. "It was about power. About who gets to stand at the front of the room. About who has to prove what, and when." Now the room wasn't just watching. They were feeling. "My qualifications," he said slowly, "do not depend on my willingness to perform on command." Rhodes's face remained composed, but the color in her cheeks had risen. "If you'd like to schedule a collaborative seminar," Elijah offered, "you're welcome to send an email. But if your aim is to embarrass me into silence, I'm afraid you've miscalculated." He turned to his students. "Let's get back to it," he said. "We were talking about who gets to speak in rooms they were never invited into." A few of them nodded. One or two even smiled. Rhodes didn't move. Her student worker looked uncertain. Then, silently, he disconnected the projector, packed up the cord, rolled the cart out behind her. She left without another word. But before she reached the door, Elijah said one final thing, not loud, but unmistakable. Not everything worth knowing can be solved in 2 dimensions. But before the door closed fully, Elijah noticed something strange. Jordan Bell, seated in the 3rd row, staring wide-eyed at the board, mouth slightly open, not in shock from the drama, but in recognition. After class, Jordan approached him with a whisper. "Professor, I've seen that equation before. It's not from any class." He paused, voice shaking. "It's from my file." She used my failed problem set as a weapon. The campus didn't sleep that night. By morning, whispers had spread like wildfire. Some called it the showdown in room 24. Others just said, "Did you hear what Dr. Grant did?" Elijah hadn't planned it that way. He hadn't gone looking for spectacle. But when a person stands up quietly in the face of humiliation and refuses to fold, the silence echoes louder than any outburst. Especially when that person is not the one the room expected to hold the power. The next day, the university's internal message board was lit up. No names were mentioned, but faculty and students knew how to read between the lines. Post by STEM for Truth, at night, disappointed by the lack of academic rigor in what was supposed to be an interdisciplinary exchange. Refusing to engage with a problem. How is that educational? Comment by Justice Lens 34, at 9/7. He didn't refuse to engage. He refused to be baited. There's a difference. That moment taught more than any equation. Reply by Alumni Matters at 9. If the roles were reversed, and a math professor was invited to comment on a historical document, would we be so quick to defend walking away? But one post, anonymous, cut to the bone. Why is it that every time we try to raise standards, we're accused of racism? Not everything is about race. Some people just aren't qualified to be here. Elijah read them all, in silence. Later that day, his classroom was different. The students arrived early. They were quieter, more attentive. There was a new energy, electric and charged, but not chaotic. It was the energy of a room that had seen something raw and couldn't forget it. Elijah didn't mention the incident. Instead, he wrote one line on the board. The performance of intellect is not the same as the possession of it. Then he turned around. Let's talk about that. One student raised their hand, a white sophomore who hadn't spoken all semester. "Sir, I just wanted to say, what happened yesterday? It made me think about how often we expect people to prove themselves, even when we don't have to." Elijah nodded. That's the legacy of inequality. It's not just about access, it's about the price you pay once you get in the room. A black girl near the front added, "People act like refusing to solve that problem was weak, but it was power. You didn't flinch, you didn't need to." Someone else murmured, "That hit different." Elijah let it hang in the air. Then carefully, he said, "Some of us have to be exceptional just to be treated as adequate. That's not education, that's survival." No one spoke for several seconds. And then, slowly, one by one, heads nodded. But not everyone was moved. That afternoon, Elijah received a formal notice from the dean's office. Subject: request for clarification, classroom conduct, and professional decorum. It cited a public misunderstanding between faculty. It requested a meeting. It recommended de-escalation. The tone was neutral. The implication wasn't. He was being warned. He wasn't surprised. But what came next was, at precisely 6:04 p.m., his office phone rang, a number from the mathematics department. He picked up expecting a secretary. Instead, it was her. "Dr. Grant." Felicity Rhodes said, her voice stripped of public performance. "Elijah speaking. I'd like to talk. Off record. In my office. 10 minutes? He didn't answer right away. But she didn't wait. "I assume you've got the letter from the dean by now, so you know why this conversation matters." Click. She hung up. The hallway outside her office was dim, carpet worn from years of pacing faculty debates. Elijah stood outside her door, exhaled once, then knocked. "Come in." Her office was larger than his. Of course it was. Window facing the quad, a private whiteboard, books on topology, chaos theory, mathematical logic, a crystal decanter of water, a single orchid on the desk. She gestured to the seat across from her. "Close the door." He did. "I won't pretend I didn't intend to make you uncomfortable yesterday," she began. But I didn't expect the way you handled it. You mean with composure? Elijah said flatly. I mean with control. She replied. You turned it. Made it about power. It was always about power. Elijah replied. You just didn't expect to lose any. She looked at him, long and hard. Why didn't you solve it? She asked finally. You clearly could have. He considered lying, but he didn't. Because solving it would have proved what? That I know math? That I'm more than a history professor? That I'm not a stereotype? She said nothing. I'm not interested in proving I belong, he continued. I'm interested in why you assumed I didn't. Now her gaze dropped. A flicker of something unguarded passed over her face. I didn't expect, she trailed off. I didn't expect you to be so familiar with higher mathematics. That's not the same as saying you didn't expect a history professor to be familiar, he said. Let's not pretend this is about discipline. The orchid on the desk swayed in the breeze from the vent. Silence again. Finally, she said, your student Jordan Bell. He's the one who shared that equation. No, Elijah said, voice calm. You did. When you weaponized his failure for your demonstration, her lips tightened. That equation was anonymous. To you, Elijah said, but not to him. Not to me. She leaned back in her chair, rubbed her temple. This isn't how I wanted this to go, but it's exactly how you orchestrated it. Then, for a moment, she dropped the act. I don't hate you, Elijah. I just don't like being upstaged. He chuckled, low. That's not about me. That's about the mirror. And just as he stood to leave, she said it quietly, almost as a confession. You could have made me look like a fool, but you didn't. Why? He turned at the door. Because you already did that yourself. That night, a photo leaked onto a student-run social media account. A still shot from the classroom confrontation. The caption read, when a history professor reads your math paper better than you can. And within 2 hours, the entire campus had seen it. But it wasn't just students watching now. The administration was too. The morning after the leaked photo, Dr. Felicity Rhodes canceled her first 2 classes. She didn't give a reason. She didn't have to. The image Elijah standing calmly before her projection, his hands clasped behind his back, eyes steady while the math glowed behind him, had gone viral across campus, and not just among students. The image had become an allegory. One department's golden child, trying to make a public example of a black professor, only for him to walk away untouched, undefeated, and undeniably sharper than anyone had expected. But Rhodes wasn't done. She couldn't afford to be. At 3:12 p.m. she called Elijah again. This time, no preamble. I'd like to see what you can really do, she said. In my office. 30 minutes. He paused. You sure about that?
Yes.
Click. When Elijah arrived, she was already waiting. The room was colder than before. Blinds drawn, fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Her desk was spotless, except for a folder resting in the center. Inside it, 5 sheets of paper, crisp and deliberate. Each one carried a separate equation. And not just any equations. These were upper-level graduate problems from MIT's theoretical mathematics archives. Problems that could chew up an average PhD candidate and spit them out shaking. Elijah glanced at them. Didn't flinch. She slid the folder toward him. No audience. Just the 2 of us. Solve what you can. Am I being tested? He asked. You could say that. He sat, opened the folder, and started to write. What followed wasn't fast. It wasn't flashy. It was surgical. Each line he wrote was deliberate. Clean. The way someone might write music or lace a pair of shoes without thinking. There were no dramatic pauses, no self-corrections, no glances toward Rhodes for approval. Only the quiet scratch of graphite against paper. After the second problem, Felicity stood and walked slowly to the window. Not because she was bored, but because she couldn't look directly at what she was watching. By the third solution, her throat tightened. By the fourth, she felt nauseous. By the fifth, she was no longer curious. She was shaken. Elijah slid the final page forward and stood, his posture unchanged. You didn't expect me to finish all 5. No, she admitted, voice distant. You thought I'd get stuck somewhere around 2. Maybe struggle through 3. You were hoping to confirm I was a fluke, or that I'd learned enough to appear impressive, but not enough to match you. He was calm, not cruel. Just done with pretending. I've read that last one before, he added. Problem set from the 2014 MIT qualifying round. Category Fluid Dynamics and Thermal Flow. Her head snapped up. How would you? Because I was there, he said softly. That was the year I passed with distinction. Silence. Complete. Total. Then he said it. I hold a PhD in applied mathematics from MIT. And a second doctorate in African American history from Howard. You didn't stumble into a lucky moment, Felicity. You walked straight into the part of me I buried. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. You want to know the worst part? He asked. Still, she said nothing. I'm better at math than history. But I chose history, because math rooms made me feel invisible. And history, at least gave me language for that. That's when her hands began to shake. Not because she was afraid, but because she realized how profoundly she'd misjudged the man sitting across from her. I didn't see any of this in your CV, she finally whispered. I scrubbed it, Elijah said, purposely. Every academic gatekeeper I'd ever met assumed I'd used one field to pad my resume for the other. No one could handle that both were real, especially not in a black man. She sat down slowly. He remained standing. I didn't need to solve that equation in my classroom, he said, because I solved all of you, years ago. Another pause. Then Felicity's voice, quiet, cracking around the edges, asked something she hadn't expected to ask. Why did you walk away from the field? Elijah tilted his head. Why does that matter now? Because I need to understand, she said, almost pleading. Not as your critic, as your peer. Elijah turned away, his hand resting on the doorknob. And then he answered without turning back. I left because the last time I solved a problem this clean, my advisor told me, that was brilliant for someone like you. He opened the door, paused, then added, and I haven't touched pure math since. But someone else had overheard the entire conversation, just outside the door. And they weren't from the mathematics department. The door closed behind Elijah, with a quiet finality. But just beyond it, leaned against the wall, stood someone else. Dr. Janine Holcomb. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop. She had been on her way to the math department's administrative wing to deliver paperwork on the upcoming joint Black History Symposium. But when she heard raised voices, and recognized both of them, something in her told her to pause. She'd heard enough, and it didn't surprise her. Not entirely. Elijah Grant wasn't ordinary. He never had been. But now, as she turned and walked silently down the corridor, her heart was heavy, not just for what Elijah had endured, but for how clearly it mirrored the silent ache so many of them carried in academia. That evening, Elijah sat alone in his apartment, the lights dim, the rain having given way to fog. The city lights blinked outside his window, muffled by condensation. His bookshelves were lined with Baldwin, Du Bois, Audre Lorde, but somewhere tucked behind the second row were also dusty textbooks on nonlinear systems, fluid mechanics, and probabilistic theory. He hadn't touched them in almost a decade. He poured himself a cup of black tea and stared at a file folder on his coffee table. Inside it were photocopies of both his dissertations, one written in the precise staccato rhythm of mathematical argumentation, the other layered in emotional weight and historical narrative. Two versions of his brilliance, only one of which the world ever seemed willing to acknowledge. He remembered the day he'd defended his thesis at MIT. The committee room smelled like dry coffee and ego. The board had nodded slowly during his presentation, impressed but guarded. Afterward, during the Q&A, a professor from Stanford leaned back in his chair and said, "You've shown real talent here, Dr. Grant, especially for someone with your background." Elijah had smiled, but inside, something broke. Not because he didn't know what the professor meant, but because he did. And because he knew without question that if his skin had been 2 shades lighter, the word talent wouldn't have come with an asterisk. He never told anyone, not even his mother. He'd graduated, accepted quietly, and pivoted to a second path. History had always been his other love, the one place he could make sense of everything that had hurt him. But even there, the weight never left. Black faculty were rare. Black faculty who spoke without apology were rarer still. And black faculty who said no to whiteness wrapped in compliments. They didn't last long. He didn't choose history because it was easier. He chose it because it let him breathe. Because in history, he wasn't asked to explain his existence. He was allowed to examine it. Dr. Felicity Rhodes couldn't sleep that night. She sat in her home study, rereading Elijah's solutions, still unable to find a single flaw, not a single misstep. Each one annotated with precision, clarity, and perhaps most disorienting of all, grit. She kept hearing his voice. Because I was there. That was the year I passed with distinction, She hadn't believed it at first. But the registrar's database confirmed it. Elijah Nathaniel Grant, Ph.D. Applied Mathematics, MIT, 2014. Dissertation title: Modeling Stochastic Variance in Unstable Diffusion Fields. It was real.
It had always been real.
She looked back at her own CV, the awards and citations, the carefully calibrated accolades. How many doors had opened for her without question? How many rooms had she walked into assuming the right to be there? She tried to imagine what it felt like to carry not one but two credentials, and still be treated as if neither existed. It was dizzying. It was humbling. It was, in its own way, a kind of violence. The next day she arrived on campus early, eyes heavy, mind cluttered. She walked straight to the faculty lounge, where Janine Holcomb was stirring cream into her coffee. Felicity paused. "Can I sit?" Janine looked up surprised, then nodded. "I owe you an apology," Felicity began, "for how I've carried myself, and for what I've allowed myself not to see." Janine said nothing. She let the silence stretch. Felicity continued, "I thought I was being rigorous, that I was defending standards, but what I was really doing was guarding a gate that wasn't mine to protect." Janine finally met her eyes. "What changed?" "I saw him," she said quietly. "I really saw him." Janine nodded. "Welcome to the beginning." Elijah didn't attend the department mixer that Friday. He sat in his office instead, grading midterm essays with jazz playing low in the background. The letter from the dean still sat unopened on his desk. He didn't need to read it. He already knew the tone. The calls for unity, the vague language of collaboration, the subtle policing of black excellence under the guise of professionalism. But there was a knock at his door. "Come in." It was Janine. She stepped in with a calm, measured expression. "I heard about the conversation," she said. "In Felicity's office." Elijah looked up. "I figured someone would." "She's questioning things now," Janine said. "It won't fix the past, but it's a start." "She doesn't need to question me," Elijah said. "She needs to question why she never questioned herself." Janine smiled sadly. "That's a heavier ask than most people realize." They sat for a few moments in companionable silence. Then Elijah asked, "Do you ever feel like, no matter what you do, they only see the box you came in?" "All the time," she said. "But that's why we stay. So they learn how much doesn't fit inside it." Across campus, Dr. Rhodes sat at her desk, drafting an email. To Faculty Senate. Subject: Proposal. Interdisciplinary Symposium on Race, Intelligence, and Institutional Bias. She hesitated, fingers hovering over the keyboard, then added one final line. Requested keynote, Dr. Elijah Grant, and hit send. But unknown to her, that invitation would spark a backlash louder than any she had faced before. The door to Elijah's office rarely stayed closed now. It began with Jordan Bell, who showed up twice a week like clockwork. Then came Nina, from Intro to Algebra, who wasn't even in Elijah's department, but said she'd heard what he did. Then Reggie, then Elia, then David, whose eyes watered when he said, "Sir, no one's ever made me feel smart before." Soon, they were showing up in clusters. Students of color, mostly. First generation, neurodivergent. Students who sat in the back of their classrooms hoping no one would notice how badly they were drowning. Students who weren't failing yet, but knew the system had no cushion if they did. They didn't all need help with math. Some needed advice. Some needed to talk. Some just needed to sit in a room with someone who didn't look through them. And Elijah let them. Even when his schedule overflowed. Even when it meant working late. Because he remembered the silence of trying to survive places not built for you, and the miracle of one voice that said, "You're not crazy. This really is hard, and you really do matter." Word spread fast. Elijah Grant wasn't just a history professor anymore. He was something else now. A symbol, a legend. And that's when the whispers started. It began in faculty lounges. First quiet, then sharper. "He's developing a cult of personality," said one economics professor. "Those students need structure, not saviors," muttered someone from computer science. One tenured chair, who'd never spoken directly to Elijah, commented at lunch, "It's irresponsible to let personal identity become a pedagogical strategy." The meaning was always the same. He was gaining too much gravity. And gravity, in a place like Whitebridge University, was only allowed in controlled quantities, unless you were already part of the center. Then came the summons. Email. Dean Rutherford's office. 10 over an a.m. sharp. No subject line. No explanation. Just show up. Elijah wore a dark suit, not out of deference, but armor. He knew this script. Black professors didn't get asked into administrative spaces for praise. They were invited for conversations that were really negotiations between presence and compliance. Dean Rutherford's office was large and wood-paneled, a tribute to old academia. The walls smelled like tenure, an inherited privilege. The dean stood as Elijah entered. "Dr. Grant, thank you for coming." They shook hands. No small talk, just tension pretending to be professionalism. "Please sit," Rutherford offered, gesturing to a leather chair. Elijah remained standing for a second longer than necessary, then sat. "I've been hearing a great deal about your recent impact," the dean began, "with students, with cross-departmental engagements, and with the larger conversation you've helped spark." Elijah said nothing. "We've had an increase in student engagement around interdisciplinary scholarship, particularly from underrepresented demographics. It's compelling." Still, Elijah waited. "I'd like to propose a new initiative," the dean said finally. "An interdisciplinary course co-sponsored by the history and mathematics departments, tentatively titled Logic, Power and Protest. You'd co-design it, maybe even co-teach, possibly with Dr. Rhodes." Elijah's eyebrows lifted, just slightly. "That's unexpected," he said. "It's timely," Rutherford replied. "We want to showcase collaboration, institutional evolution, equity in motion." Elijah's voice was calm. "So, after years of invisibility, now I'm the face of progress." The dean's smile tightened. "You're not being used, Dr. Grant. You're being offered a platform." Elijah leaned forward. "I've had platforms before. They usually come with traps." Rutherford's eyes flickered. "This isn't that." "Then why now?" Elijah asked. "Why after everything that's happened? Why only now am I worth listening to?" Silence. And in that silence, Elijah heard the answer. "Because your story went public. Because your students won't shut up about you. Because you made them look bad, and now they needed you to make them look good." He nodded once. "I'll think about it." Just then, the office door opened without a knock. It was Dr. Rhodes. Her eyes met Elijah's, then the dean's. "I hope I'm not interrupting," she said. The dean stood again, surprised. "Dr. Rhodes, I wasn't expecting." "I have a proposal," she said, already walking toward the desk. "A formal one." She placed a printed document on the desk. Bold title across the top. Whitebridge Symposium Proposal. Race Intelligence and the Myth of Meritocracy. The dean looked up. "Felicity, this isn't the time." "It is," she said. "This is the only time. We have the opportunity to create something real here. Not just optics, not just reaction, but reflection." She turned to Elijah. "I'm not asking you to save us. I'm asking you to lead us. But on your terms." Elijah's jaw tightened. "Why would they listen now?" "Because they have to," she said. "Because the old shields aren't working anymore. And because I'm not hiding behind them anymore either." The room fell quiet. Even the hum of the radiator seemed to pause. Elijah stood. He didn't say yes, but he didn't walk away either. Outside the dean's office, in the hallway where conversations were never supposed to echo, someone was recording phone low by their side. Lens pointed at the door. Within the hour, the proposal would leak, and Whitebridge would be forced to choose sides. Elijah stared at the printed proposal Dr. Rhodes had left on the dean's desk. Its pages crisp, its title bold, Whitebridge Symposium Proposal, Race Intelligence and the Myth of Meritocracy. The symmetry between mathematics and history felt almost poetic, reason and narrative woven into one conversation. But was she really asking to collaborate or reclaim control? Felicity cleared her throat. "I didn't write this as damage control," she said quietly. Her eyes met his. "I wrote it because I was wrong. I realized I've built too many walls in the name of rigor, walls that prevented people like Jordan, Ryan, others from ever stepping into the room." Elijah didn't respond immediately. He wondered whether she meant it. Her posture was less guarded now, her voice softer, but the memory of how she'd ambushed him still burned behind his eyes. "Why now?" he finally asked. She inhaled, then said, "Because after last night, when your interview started appearing, I felt like I got punched in the gut, not because you were becoming greater than me, but because I saw how small I'd made the world." He regarded her. The apology wasn't tidy. It was jagged. It said, "I saw." It asked, May I walk with you now? The dean sat behind them, listening, his fingers steepled on the desk. The silence was thick, like smoke before a storm. He's right, Rutherford said, breaking the tension. Dr. Grant, given what's happened, I believe the Institute would benefit from this course. Interdisciplinary work has become central to how we differentiate ourselves, and you two are uniquely positioned to deliver both credibility and a narrative shift. Elijah's pulse quickened. Something familiar in that context, being the face of uniquely positioned projects that become burdens more than honors. Felicity's voice, soft yet firm. I want this course to be a place where students see that tools are neutral, but who wields them, why and on what assumptions is not. We'll bring in data, history, philosophy, even sociology. We'll name bias as part of methodology. Elijah exhaled. Slowly. That's ambitious. She nodded. It should be. Because the stakes are. The dean leaned forward. You'll have administrative support. We'll cross-list it. We'll give it priority registration for underrepresented students. And if it's successful, paid research assistants, guest speakers, funding. They looked at him as though he were the linchpin. He sat back. The glow from the polished wood surfaces flickered in his eyes. Then came the sign of both promise and vulnerability. Felicity frowned, as though she was bracing. I understand your hesitation, but I want it clear. I see you as a partner, not a curiosity. Elijah weighed the moment. He could decline, make it purely on his terms, walk away with dignity again. But some offers were too rare, and some moments too necessary to refuse. Okay, he said finally. I'll do it, but with one condition. She leaned in. Name it. He said, we do this not to prove we belong. We do it to dismantle the assumption that belonging ever needed proof. Felicity's lips curved in a fragile smile. Agreed. Rutherford clapped his hands softly. Excellent. I'll draft the formal memorandum. As they stood to leave, Felicity paused. She leaned toward Elijah. I owe Jordan and that class more than I ever realized. I want you to tell me when I slip, when I hiddenly exclude. I won't be perfect, but I want to learn. He nodded. Word leaked out that afternoon. Though the formal course approval hadn't circulated yet, whispers had begun. Rhodes and Grant course on faculty lists, in student groups, in administrative emails. Some viewed it with cautious optimism. Others smirked, muttered, raised brows in departmental meetings. In the math department, there was less enthusiasm. One tenured professor, Dr. Miles Barlow, left the faculty lounge mid-lunch muttering, he's not math. She can't trust history doing more than commentary. In the history wing, a few professors congratulated Elijah. Some sincerely, others with veiled compliments. Glad your voice is being heard, said one. But he caught the hesitation. And I hope you don't lose your home base. The fear lingered in his tone. That brilliance crossing domains would make the humanities lesser in the eyes of peers. Late that evening, Elijah found a note tucked under his office door. It read,
Course approved.
watch your back. No signature. He didn't flinch. He tucked it into his journal next to Jordan's notebook. Over the next few days, preparations began. Felicity and Elijah met in conference rooms, drafting syllabi, outlining modules, contacting guest speakers. Their sessions were electric. They debated how to balance rigor and accessibility. They argued over whether to use differential equations or statistical regression models. In week 5 of the course, they disagreed. They laughed. They erased. They rewrote. But every time the draft teetered on being too abstract or too inaccessible, Elijah would stop and ask, if Jordan can't see at least one link between what we teach and his life, we've failed. Felicity's nods grew more frequent. Real. One evening, after a meeting that stretched late, she said quietly, I wish I'd had someone like you when I was coming up. She paused. I wish I hadn't thought needing help was weakness. Elijah kept silent, not wanting to alter the fragility in that confession. As they left the building, side by side, their steps echoed. Two imperfect scholars walking a shared path towards something bigger than either of them. On the morning before the first class, Elijah walked through the quad. His phone buzzed. A news alert. Campus whispers. Professors Rhodes and Grant, to teach course on race and data. Social media had threads already. Hashtags spun, memes shared, screenshots analyzed. He pocketed the phone, then paused at the sculpture by the fountains. Students clustered nearby, pointing. He caught one of their curious looks and nodded. He felt it both weight and lift. This would not be easy. Later that afternoon, as he headed to the classroom, Dean Rutherford caught up to him in the corridor. "Be ready," the dean said quietly. "You'll see both cheers and resistance, but you have administration support. Trust me." Elijah nodded. He remembered all the support that turned conditional. He exhaled. He unlocked the classroom door. Inside, he found Felicity already setting up. The whiteboard clean, chairs arranged in a semicircle. Projector ready, their name placards in the front. He set his bag down. Felicity turned. They exchanged a look, not triumph, but determination. Outside, he could hear the faint hum of voices gathering. Students arriving. But he also caught something behind him, pressed to the glass of the hallway window. A silhouette. But the face was obscured. He frowned, but stepped inside. As the classroom filled, Elijah walked to the projection screen and pressed play on the introductory slide. The first image flashed, a large close-up portrait of W.E.B. Du Bois, glowing in grayscale, his eyes penetrating, and behind it, written faintly in red letters, "Who defines intelligence?" A murmur rippled the room, but Elijah's breath caught, because he recognized an alternate code hidden behind. A watermark of numbers only he knew. The coordinates to the partial differential trap equation Rhodes had used. She hadn't given up the weapon. She'd reworked it into their syllabus. And now the trap was in their planned collaboration. The first session of Logic, Power, and Protest was unlike anything Whitebridge had ever seen. The hallway outside Lecture Hall 4 buzzed with energy before the doors even opened. Students stood shoulder to shoulder, clutching their schedules, whispering rumors about that course everyone was talking about. The one that combined math and history, equations and protest, data and lived experience. The one with him. When the door opened at 8:45 a.m., students surged in. Some came with notebooks, others with laptops, but a few came with something different: intentions. By 9 hours, the room was over capacity. Dozens sat on the floor or leaned against walls. They came from different majors, different years, different identities, but the focus was sharp, all eyes on the front. Dr. Elijah Grant walked in first, wearing a navy blazer over an open-collared white shirt, his notes folded neatly under one arm. Felicity Rhodes followed, her usual clinical precision softened by a navy sweater and slacks. They stood shoulder to shoulder. The projector hummed to life. The opening slide glowed against the board. Logic, Power, and Protest, dissecting the narratives we are told, and the numbers we ignore. Below it, a grayscale image of W.E.B. Du Bois. And faintly embedded in the slide, so faint, most wouldn't see it, were coordinates. Coordinates that meant something only to Elijah. The same problem set Felicity had used against him weeks ago. Folded into the background of the opening lecture, he didn't react. Not visibly. Instead, he stepped to the podium. "Let's begin with a question," he said. "Who defines intelligence?" Dozens of pens hit paper. Fingers hovered over keyboards. The room leaned forward. "For the next 15 weeks," he continued, "we'll explore the systems and assumptions that shape what we call knowledge. The mathematics of incarceration, the history of IQ, the language of algorithms, and the people erased by them." He glanced around. "Some of this will make you uncomfortable." It should. Rhodes stepped forward. "But discomfort isn't danger. In this space we interrogate, not indoctrinate. We ask how data can liberate or dominate, and who decides which is which." Most students nodded, but not all. In the third row, a young man named Kyle Mercer sat with a quiet smirk. He was a sophomore, supposedly undeclared, though his digital footprint told a different story. He had 3 burner YouTube channels, 2 active accounts on forums that specialized in anti-woke campus takedowns, and one goal for this semester: expose DI brainwashing from the inside. He had enrolled under a fake name. His GoPro was hidden inside a nondescript travel mug on his desk. And it was already recording. He zoomed in on Elijah's face, captured his tone, waited for words he could lift. He didn't care about truth. He cared about clicks. Midway through class, Elijah projected a chart mapping standardized test scores by zip code. "The higher the income, the higher the score," he said. "Correlation? Sure, but also causation, resources, exposure, generational wealth. Yet we treat these numbers as destiny." Then he shifted slides. A handwritten letter from 1956, written by a black student denied admission to a state university. "We'll treat this letter Elijah said with the same analytic rigor we apply to equations. The students were rapt. Even Felicity looked moved. But in the corner, Kyle was building a narrative. He clipped Elijah's sentence, "We treat numbers as destiny," and mentally flagged it. He clipped another, "Discomfort isn't danger," and a third, "We interrogate, not indoctrinate." By the time the class ended, Kyle had enough. The students filed out. Some lingered to ask questions. Jordan Bell dapped Elijah on his way out. A white student named Clara told Felicity, "This might be the first time I felt invited to understand math." That night, Kyle Mercer uploaded a video. The thumbnail was dramatic. Elijah's face mid-sentence, blurred for effect, overlaid with bold red text. Black proof says, "Math is racist." The video was deceptively edited. Cuts rearranged. Phrases stripped of context. Slides flashed out of sequence. His voice was manipulated, made to sound more aggressive. The caption read, "Welcome to woke academia. This is what your tuition pays for." Within 4 hours it had 200. Within 10 it hit 1 million. And Elijah didn't even know it yet. At 6:12 a.m. the next morning, Elijah opened his email to 342 unread messages. The subject line on the most recent one read, "You're the reason this country's broken." At 6:12 a.m., Elijah sat at his desk in the soft blue light of dawn, steam rising from his untouched coffee. The email count climbed in real time, 302 unread messages. All caps subject lines screamed at him from the preview pane. "You're poisoning our kids. Fire this radical now. Math isn't racist. You are." Each one was a punch he couldn't dodge. He hadn't slept, hadn't even known about the video until Jordan sent a shaky text at 2:00. "Prof G, you need to see this, it's bad. Like, really bad." The link opened to the thumbnail. His face caught mid-sentence. His expression distorted, the headline screeching in red. "Black prof says math is racist?" The video had been edited with surgical dishonesty, cutting his quotes out of context, overlaying them with ominous music, even zooming in on his hands and eyes to make him look unhinged. Felicity's voice had been removed entirely. None of the nuance remained. None of the humanity. Just a caricature crafted for rage, not truth. And the comment. Elijah closed the laptop. It felt like the air had thickened around him, like the oxygen had been yanked from the room. He'd been careful, so careful, his whole career to never let things spiral beyond his control. But this wasn't his spiral. It was someone else's storm, and he was being pulled in. By 9:00 a.m., students were buzzing. Everyone had seen the video. Some had believed it, until Nina reposted the real lecture. She captioned it simply, "Y'all want the truth? Here's the full class. Watch for yourself." Then Clara stitched it on TikTok. "He literally said the opposite. This is why context matters." Then Jordan dropped a side-by-side comparison video. It went viral. The numbers flipped. By noon, the hashtag John Grant did it right trended on Twitter. By 3 p.m., BuzzFeed picked it up. Then, Vice. Then Vox. Students from Yale, Howard, UCLA, Morehouse, and Columbia reposted his quote. "Discomfort isn't danger. We interrogate, not indoctrinate." Articles called him the professor who fought back with context. Black academic, who disarmed disinformation with his syllabus. Woke warrior? No. Just a scholar who teaches the whole equation. Suddenly, Elijah wasn't a villain. He was a voice, a story, a symbol of something much larger. And that terrified him more than the hate. Felicity knocked on his office door just after sunset. "I brought takeout," she said, holding up 2 steaming boxes from the halal cart down the street. He didn't smile, just moved aside so she could enter. She sat without waiting to be offered. "You okay?" He shook his head. "I never wanted this." "I know," she said gently. "I wanted a course. A conversation, not a cause." Felicity opened her container. "It's out of our hands now." "But it's not," Elijah said. "They're quoting me like I'm a slogan, not a person." She chewed slowly, then said, "Maybe they need both." He didn't answer. He stared at the window, where the city lights blinked in the distance. "Am I crazy?" he asked finally, "for not being excited?" She replied without hesitation. "No, because you're not just a headline, you're living it. Every second." The halal was untouched. The next morning, a silver car pulled up outside the humanities building. A woman stepped out, mid-30s, brown trench coat, press badge clipped to her belt. Her steps were confident. her eyes observant. She walked straight to the receptionist. New York Times, she said. I'm here for Dr. Grant. 10 minutes later, Elijah stood at his doorway. As she introduced herself, Clarissa Shaw, I cover higher education and cultural discourse. He hesitated. Did I agree to this? She smiled. Not yet. He considered shutting the door, but something in her tone, soft but sharp, made him pause. I'm not here to make you a martyr, she said. I'm here to ask questions, the kind that don't go viral. Elijah stepped aside. The office suddenly felt smaller with her presence. She opened her notebook. Why do you think your lecture struck such a nerve? He leaned against the edge of his desk. Because people aren't afraid of what I teach. They're afraid of what it reveals. She scribbled. Why now, she asked. Why this moment? Elijah thought carefully. Because the lie got too loud, and context got too quiet. She looked up. Is it true you have 2 PhDs? He nodded. And you've hidden one for years? I buried it, he said. To survive. Clarissa put down her pen. And now? He exhaled. Now I don't know who I am to them. Clarissa closed her notebook. Her next words changed the entire energy of the room. What if I told you this story isn't just about you? She opened her laptop. On the screen, leaked emails from Whitebridge faculty. The subject line read, Terminate before tenure. Preventing a PR disaster. Clarissa Shaw hadn't expected her research to go that far. But journalists are driven by patterns, and something about Elijah Grant's reticence didn't sit right. There was brilliance in him, yes, but also a very specific silence, one that had cost him years, one that hinted at something lost. So she dug. While Whitebridge buzzed with think pieces and administration meetings, Clarissa opened archived databases from MIT's thesis repository. She typed, Elijah Nathaniel Grant. Nothing came up at first under his history degree. She tried again. Applied mathematics. There it was. Title Threshold Dynamics in Collective Action. Modeling the Tipping Point of Social Resistance. Author Elijah N. Grant. Submitted. She opened the PDF, and her breath caught. It wasn't just math. It was prophecy. In detailed technical language, complete with differential models and simulation graphs. Elijah had mapped the exact conditions under which oppressed populations reached a collective activation point. His model accounted for economic strain, police violence, media response, even psychological resilience. He called it the resistance activation curve. What shook her most? His simulation had retroactively predicted the Ferguson uprisings, months before they happened. It wasn't theoretical. It was predictive, and no one had talked about it. Clarissa sat back, blinking. Why had he buried this? Why had no one else uncovered it? She printed the thesis, 3-hole punched it, and carried it in a manila folder to her next interview. Back at Whitebridge, Elijah was trying to breathe. The leaked emails rattled in his mind. The phrase terminate before tenure echoed like a wound. They'd been planning this, not after his viral fame, but before. The fame had only accelerated the need. His phone buzzed again. Too many people wanted him now. Too many hands, reaching out with opportunities coded in exploitation. Calls from Harvard, Yale, Princeton, podcast invites, speaking requests. They wanted his story, but not his scars. They wanted the performance, not the pain. And amid it all, the students still knocked on his door. Still came with real needs, real fear, real hope. Elijah stayed late, in his office, his shoulders heavy, his eyes bloodshot. And then Clarissa returned. She didn't sit this time. She handed him the manila folder. What's this? He asked. Your math thesis, she said. The one you hid. Elijah froze.
I didn't hide it, he said after a long pause. I just stopped being the person who wrote it.
Clarissa tilted her head. Why? He opened the folder, flipped through the pages he hadn't seen in nearly a decade. Because after I submitted it, he said, my advisor told me it was politically dangerous. That modeling black uprisings with mathematics made the academy uncomfortable. That it made me look like an activist, not a scientist. And you believed them? She asked. I wanted to survive, he said. So I changed disciplines, changed my name on published work, changed my future. Clarissa sat across from him now. This changes everything. Elijah closed the folder. I know, he whispered. It didn't take long. Someone on Twitter leaked a screenshot of the thesis title. Within hours, Reddit threads exploded. Mathematicians began dissecting it. Activists called it a Rosetta Stone for protest strategy. Journalists called it the most important mathematical paper never discussed. The story went viral again, this time from a completely different angle. Scholar who predicted Ferguson with math. Professor's hidden thesis explains why George Floyd protests spread. From numbers to narratives, Elijah Grant's double genius. Suddenly he wasn't just a target. He was a commodity. Departments that had once mocked him began emailing with fellowship offers. Think tanks asked to republish his thesis. A renowned public policy institute offered him a research grant to further explore the algorithmic architecture of resistance. The emails came fast, filled with buzzwords: thought leader, visionary, trailblazer. But to Elijah, they all sounded like the same thing.
Now that you've proven your worth, we want in.
In the faculty lounge, Felicity Rhodes skimmed her inbox when one message stopped her cold. Subject line: Symposium invitation. Princeton Institute for Ethics and Data. It was addressed to both her and Elijah. She opened it. Dear Dr. Rhodes and Dr. Grant, we would be honored to feature your joint course and Dr. Grant's groundbreaking thesis at our upcoming Ivy League Symposium on Interdisciplinary Approaches to Structural Inequality. We are particularly interested in how mathematical modeling and historical analysis can co-construct new narratives of justice. Please confirm your attendance. All expenses will be covered. Panel titled The Equations Behind the Uprising. Her hands trembled slightly. She forwarded the email to Elijah with a single sentence: We've been invited to rewrite the conversation. But across campus, in a dimly lit room of the administrative building, another conversation was taking place. Dean Rutherford stood with 3 senior board members, all white, all tenured, all silent as he closed the door behind him. He's becoming bigger than the university, one said. Too big to control, another added. He's no longer a faculty issue, said the third. He's a political liability. The dean said nothing for a moment. Then finally, so what do you propose? They didn't answer directly, but the file on the table read, Dr. Elijah Grant, Internal Review, Tenure Disruption Proposal. That night, as Elijah walked across campus toward his apartment, he received a strange envelope in his mailbox. No return address. Inside was a single page, a photocopy of his old MIT ID, and a post-it note attached. Funny how fast you can be erased. He stood frozen in the dark, gripping the paper, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The symposium invitation from Princeton was supposed to feel like vindication, a marker of progress, proof that the fight had been worth it. But the closer the date drew, the more Elijah felt the walls closing in. He and Felicity spent their evenings finalizing slides, designing modules that wove together his resistance activation curve with her models of statistical logic. Their rehearsals were sharp, intentional, and at times almost joyful, like 2 musicians who'd once clashed now discovering harmony in the same key. Yet even inside their rhythm, something was off. Elijah could feel it in the halls, in the sudden silence when he walked by the faculty lounge, in the way some colleagues had stopped making eye contact altogether. A month ago, he was the most sought-after mind on campus. Now he was a risk again. The backlash wasn't loud. That would have been easier to fight. It was quiet, insidious, like mold growing beneath the surface. It started with the flyers. He spotted the first one posted near the humanities elevator, a crumpled 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper with bold black letters. Woke Math 101, where feelings replace facts. Enroll today in oppression algebra with professor's identity and guilt. A caricature sketch of him and Felicity. His skin darkened grotesquely, hers drawn with exaggerated features, sat at the bottom. Someone had stapled it to the wall. By the time Elijah walked into class that day, he'd found 7 more. 1 on the bulletin board outside the math department, 1 in the men's restroom, 2 on student lockers, 3 on lampposts along the quad. Felicity saw them too. Her face tightened, her mouth pressed into a thin line. They're not even trying to hide it anymore, she said quietly. They never were, Elijah replied. Later that evening, they brought it up with Dean Rutherford. He folded the flyer slowly and placed it on his desk like it was too fragile to touch. This is unfortunate, he said. Unfortunate? Felicity asked, her tone rising. It's defamation. It's incitement, Elijah added, and it's happening on your campus. We've sent out a memo, the dean said. Reminded students and faculty that targeted harassment violates our policies. Security will be increased. That's it? Elijah asked. No investigation? The dean's expression was diplomatic, measured. Hollow. We're trying to avoid further polarization. That word again. Polarization. As if naming racism was more dangerous than being its target. Outside the dean's office, Felicity stopped walking. This isn't just discomfort, she said. It's sabotage. Elijah nodded. And it's not all students. Felicity hesitated. You think it's faculty. I think it's people who are angry. We didn't stay in our lanes. They stood there for a long moment in silence. Are you scared? She asked. Yes, Elijah said. But not for me. That night, Jordan Bell sat alone in the dorm computer lab, finishing his coding assignment for another class when a notification blinked at the top of his screen. One new email, subject a word of advice. No sender name, no signature. He clicked it open.
You seem like a smart kid.
Don't let that course ruin your transcript or your future. There are better ways to stay enrolled than playing academic activist. You've been warned. He stared at the screen. At first he laughed, just a quiet, disbelieving chuckle. Then the fear crept in. Slowly, like a shadow. He reread it. Again, and then trembling, he hit forward and sent it to Dr. Grant. 5 minutes later, Elijah's phone vibrated with the forwarded message. His chest went tight. He called Jordan immediately. You okay? Elijah asked, voice steady. Jordan was quiet on the other end. I think so.
You did the right thing, Elijah said. Don't delete it. I'm going to escalate this.
I thought they'd come for you, not us, Jordan said. They always come for the students, Elijah replied. That's the point. Make it so scary you don't want to care anymore. Jordan exhaled. I'm not dropping the class. Elijah nodded slowly. Good. Because this class isn't about surviving them. It's about understanding why they keep coming. The next day, Felicity burst into Elijah's office with her phone out. Another video, she said. But this one's not from that YouTuber. She pressed play. A new clip. From inside a faculty meeting. A professor Elijah recognized him from statistics. Was speaking to a room of peers. He didn't know he was being recorded. She's only backing him now because she needs a redemption arc, he said. It's still theater, just with better lighting. Another voice chimed in. He's turning this place into a TED Talk factory. Give it another month. He'll self-destruct. The camera shook slightly as whoever filmed it slipped the phone back into their pocket. The video had only 12 views, but it was time-stamped. The voices were clear. Names could be matched. Elijah sat down slowly, feeling the weight of it all settle over him. I used to think I could outrun this, he said. If I just worked harder, if I kept my head down. You never ran, Felicity said. You just waited for the right time to turn around and face it. He looked up at her. Are you still in this? He asked. Felicity held his gaze. I'm in until it costs me everything.
It might.
I know. They stood there for a long moment, neither moving. Because some partnerships aren't forged by liking each other. They're forged by surviving the same fire. That night, after their final symposium prep session, Elijah checked his inbox one last time. There it was, a new anonymous message. Attached, a PDF titled Diversity Faculty Audit. 225 budget cuts. Inside, under recommended non-renewals, was his name. No justification. Just a list. Just a number. Just a target. The decision wasn't made in a boardroom. It wasn't decided by the dean, or the tenured faculty, or the people who'd circulated anonymous memos and pasted racist flyers on university walls. It was made by the students. A week before the symposium at Princeton, Elijah sat with Jordan, Clara, and 4 others around the long seminar table in room 214. The door was shut. The blinds were down. The air buzzed not with fear but with determination. They're still watching us, Elijah said, quietly. We don't get to mess this up. Jordan leaned forward, voice steady. We've never had a platform like this. What if we used it? Elijah glanced toward Felicity, who leaned against the back wall, arms crossed, eyes thoughtful. We're not talking about stunts, Elijah warned. This class was built on precision. Clara tapped her notebook. What if we used that precision to tell our stories? Not just yours, not just hers, ours. Felicity straightened. You're saying the final lecture isn't just us? Jordan nodded. It's all of us. Elijah looked around the table. 6 pairs of eyes stared back. Young, tired, brilliant. He exhaled. Then we make it airtight. The day of the final lecture, room 2014, was full 20 minutes early. Not just students, staff, journalists, Alumni who had somehow heard through the digital grapevine. Cameras lined the back wall. Phone tripods clung to the edges of desks. This time, Elijah and Felicity didn't stand at the front. They sat among the students. Jordan stood first. He clutched a sheet of paper that trembled in his hand. "I used to think math hated me," he said. "I used to sit in the back of calculus and pray I wouldn't get called on. I failed 2 exams, thought about dropping out." A pause. "I thought maybe I was the stereotype they said I'd be." Silence blanketed the room. Jordan looked up. "Then I got help from a professor who wasn't even in the math department. He didn't just show me numbers. He showed me I had the right to understand them, that the room was already mine." A few people clapped quietly, then louder. Clara stood next, then 2 more, then 3. Each told a different version of the same story. One about being silenced in STEM labs. One about being mocked for overreacting to racist microaggressions. One about being dismissed as not serious enough for the field. Each story had the same ending. "This class gave me a language. This class gave me armor. This class gave me back to myself." Felicity stood only once. "Not to teach, to apologize. To every student I failed with my silence. I'm sorry." She sat before the room could process it. Then Elijah rose. He held no slides, no thesis, no clicker, just a whiteboard marker and a quote. He turned to the board and wrote slowly, "We measure what we value. So who gets measured, and how reveals everything." Then he turned around. "There are equations that track economic inequality, incarceration, test scores, wealth gaps, but what we rarely ask is who wrote those equations? Who decided what mattered?" He paused. "When I started this class, I thought I was sneaking in a side conversation. A footnote. But what I learned is this: truth doesn't need permission to be powerful." The cameras recorded every word. Students leaned forward, and Elijah's voice didn't waver. He closed with the same sentence he used on day 1. "Who defines intelligence?" This time he didn't answer it. He let the silence answer for itself. That night, the video went live, posted by the university's media department, then reposted by students, then spliced into TikTok explainers and stitched into Twitter threads. The view count climbed 10,000 in the first hour, 200,000 by midnight, over 3 million before sunrise. It wasn't just the message, it was the shift. This wasn't a debate clip. It wasn't a takedown or a reaction or an outrage magnet. It was a full lecture, told through human voices, wrapped in real experience. Something different, something whole. Celebrities shared it, activists dissected it, schools asked to license the footage for training and curriculum design. Felicity received an invitation to speak at Stanford. Elijah got offers to publish his thesis as a book. And Jordan? He got an internship offer from a tech firm that had previously rejected him without even an interview. They weren't just rewriting the narrative. They were becoming it. The next morning, Elijah walked into Dean Rutherford's office. The energy had changed. The dean stood to greet him. "Elijah," he said, smiling faintly, "you've redefined this institution's reach." Elijah didn't smile. "I didn't ask to redefine anything," he said. "I asked to teach." Rutherford gestured toward the armchair across from his desk. "I have an offer for you," he said. Elijah sat cautiously. "You're already under contract through next year. But after yesterday's extraordinary impact, the board met last night, and they're prepared to offer you a permanent position, jointly held between the mathematics and history departments." Elijah blinked. "Tenure?" The dean nodded. "Full. Immediate." There was a pause. "I assume there are expectations," Elijah said. Rutherford folded his hands. "Let's call them opportunities. Your course will become a flagship. Your research, especially your thesis, will be part of our strategic rebranding toward equity-centered excellence." Elijah stared at him. "You mean as long as I'm useful?" The dean didn't deny it. He smiled. "Is that a problem?" Elijah looked down at the contract on the desk. Then, without picking up the pen, he said, "I'll give you my answer after the symposium." But in his pocket he held a letter from MIT, an invitation to return, not as a student, as a department chair. The ballroom at the Princeton Institute for Ethics and Data was a cathedral of intellect. Glimmering chandeliers, high ceilings, rows of polished wood chairs filled with scholars, journalists, graduate students, and policymakers from around the world. On the screen above the stage, in sharp black font, were 5 words that once would have terrified Elijah Grant to see associated with his name. The equations behind the uprising. Beneath it, Dr. Elijah N. Grant, Chair Interdisciplinary Systems in Society, MIT, incoming. And just beside his name, another, Dr. Felicity Rhodes, Professor of Mathematical Ethics, Whitebridge University. He stood backstage, a microphone clipped to his lapel, his fingers brushing over the fabric of his suit, navy blue tailored, not to blend in, but to claim space. He no longer feared being seen. For so long he had split himself in half. The Elijah who once coded simulations through the night, in MIT's silent labs, and the Elijah who found peace in forgotten archives, tracing the arc of resistance through ink and memory. For so long he thought he had to choose. But today he was bringing every part of himself to the stage. When they called his name, the applause was not explosive. It was something deeper. Respect. Anticipation. He walked out into the spotlight. Felicity spoke first, mapping out the foundation of their course. How math and history had been pitted against each other for decades in academia. One seen as objective, the other as emotional. But what we've discovered, she said, is that both are only as honest as the people teaching them. Then she stepped back. Elijah took the podium. He didn't read from notes. I used to think I had to be invisible to be respected, he began. That my intelligence had to arrive before I did. That if they saw me first, really saw me, they'd stop listening. The room was still. He clicked to the next slide. A graph from his thesis. The resistance activation curve. This model got me into MIT, he said. But I buried it. Because they said it was too political. Too racial. Too dangerous. He turned back to the audience. They were right. A few heads shifted. Confused. It was dangerous to the lie, he continued. The lie that math is neutral. That history is over. That genius has a color. Or a gender. Or a last name that sounds like theirs. There was no podium now. Only a man walking the stage with truth on his tongue. He displayed data on racialized school funding. On medical bias in algorithms. On incarceration probability models. Tied to zip codes. Then, without warning, he flipped the screen to a handwritten letter. It was from Jordan Bell. A single page, written the night before the lecture went viral. Thank you for making math human. Thank you for making me human. This class didn't just teach me numbers. It taught me I wasn't a mistake. Elijah paused, then folded the paper back into his jacket pocket.
This,
He said, is what real education looks like. Not just accuracy, but accountability. Not just excellence, but empathy. A few audience members rose to their feet before he even finished his last sentence. When it was done, the room erupted. Standing ovation. Tears. Felicity joined him on stage. Her face unreadable but her eyes full of something he'd never seen before. Reverence. Not for the genius, but for the choice. To stop hiding. To stop splitting. To show up whole. Backstage, Elijah's phone buzzed endlessly. MIT's provost, a request for his lecture manuscript. A Netflix producer's assistant. A dozen universities asking for interviews. But amid all that noise, one moment cut through everything. As he walked through the corridor toward the exit, a girl barely 19 stopped him. Short braids, hoodie, shy eyes. She looked up and said softly, I didn't know people like us could do both. Elijah's throat tightened. Now you do, he said, and then he kept walking. Not away from who he had been, but toward who he was finally allowed to be. He spent years hiding brilliance just to be seen. How many more are still dimming their light to survive? Comment below if you've ever felt forced to shrink, who you are, and share this story so others know they're not alone. The world needs every side of you.